based on our ideals that we were supposedly founded on, we should have been better.
Yeah. Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I'm Brandon Spain, along with Lindsy Waters and BT Wallace, and together we explore the mysteries of the seen and the unseen, challenge conventional perspectives, and navigate the profound truths of our world, all through a biblical lens. Stay connected with us and gain exclusive access to our sponsors-only portal at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, for this week's episode. Hey, you guys. This week we are back and we're delving into this topic that we've been hitting on quite a bit, Operation Paperclip. We've had 2 episodes. BT kind of facilitated one, and then I facilitated the second one. This time it is Lindsy in the hot seat, and no pressure, Lindsy. But yeah, Lindsy is going to facilitate discussion. He's done some research, and we're all going to jump in and just explore what he has to say. But thanks, guys, for being here on the show.
Yeah, of course.
We're really looking forward to having a good conversation. So, Lindsy, without further ado.
Well, yeah, this is another one that was months in the making for us. And just, just such a huge topic with a lot of overlap, or some important overlap with some of the other things we've talked about. And just this idea that our government doesn't always have our best interest at heart, or thinks they have, or claims they're doing something in our best interest and hides things and gets involved with really shady people. I mean, you see that again and again, and this is a huge example of that. So yeah, I'm talking about the legal and moral implications of Project Paperclip.
Yeah. Well, it's like the ends justify the means. Did I say that right? I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it's that kind of altruism often. This idea of altruism often leads to that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that shocking. I mean, after MKUltra, after what we know about that, it's not that shocking. But still, some pretty shocking stuff about what we were willing to do to stick it to the commies. And let's just be honest, that was a surface reason, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
It was about control and
power,
making sure that the new establishment stayed the new establishment. But yeah, I'm going to go a little bit broader, even sometimes when we use the term Project Paperclip, where we mean more than just the literal paperclip, the scientists. There were some guys that were never brought over here that we were involved in that I think are important. I'm going to get into that with Klaus Barbie and the Gellin Organization. Never brought over here to live anyway. And so, but anything you see there is relevant to the Project Paperclip because it just shows that. And I particularly want to talk about the intelligence community's involvement in all of this. That's a lot of this book by Christopher Simpson, Blowback. This was written in the late 80s. So, I mean, the wall wasn't down yet when this was written. So I thought that was interesting. I read the Annie Jacobson book as well. And just, you can't not read her.
Well, you know what amazed me? I like what you just said about Operation Paperclip being more than just Germans in America. I mean, that's the foundation for it, but it's a lot bigger than that. And I think it's important to really begin to, as I read through Annie Jacobson's stuff too, I began to see that you had one side that tried to stick to some sort of ethics and morality. And then you have the other side, the Soviets, which they no cost, what at all costs we were going to be in control and in power, and we were going to beat the Americans. And it amazed me after Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I mean, within 2 or 3 weeks, they already had a nuclear program going. That just blew me away. So anyway.
Well, we got to talk about some of the ethical dilemmas. Like, we benefited in ways we're not going to take back from some of the science and the technology. I mean, it gave us, for better or worse, our space program. And just rocketry, ICBMs, which gave us, this is a blessing and a curse, mutually assured destruction, which will hopefully keep us from having World War III until it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I just kind of want to start, I guess, with I'll just start with Klaus Barbie. I mean,
okay.
Klaus Barbie, he was a SS and SD, which was the kind of the intelligence wing of the SS officer, and a Gestapo officer who was stationed in Lyon, France. He was called the Butcher of Lyon, if that tells you anything about him.
Yeah.
One thing he's really known for is the torture and more or less execution. The guy died from the torture of a French resistance sort of hero. Yeah, I'll come back to him. Yeah, he tortured a lot of the French resistance, and I guess you could argue, well, that's unconventional. But yeah, I mean, torture's wrong, I would say.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you do it to. He was involved in really brutal sexual crimes against women. I won't even get into in France. He sent women and children to concentration camps. That alone, to me, ought to be is a war crime. And then after the war, initially, the CIC, which was at least at that time it was Army intelligence, hired him to do intelligence work for them, including spying on the French. I mean, come on. We got a guy who committed atrocities against the French to spy on the French because we were worried they had been really infiltrated by communists. And when the French finally found out, hey, he's alive and wanted to catch him, we spirited him away to South America. In the early 50s, using one of the rat lines, they called them. These were basically like networks where Nazis could get out of Europe. And we used one of them. There was I think he was a Yugoslavian priest who was involved, who was also involved with the Nazis, was involved in it. And yeah, spirited him away to Bolivia, where he was involved for years afterwards. He got involved with Pablo Escobar, did some security for one of the guys Escobar worked with.
Really?
He claimed to have been involved in the capture and execution of Che Guevara. That hasn't been... So yeah, that if that's true, that would have meant he was still involved with the CIA, because the CIA was all over that.
Yeah. Wasn't the OSS before and then it changed?
Yeah, OSS 1947 or 48. The OSS became the CIA.
Yeah,
and we'll get into that. So yeah, in 1983, France was finally able to extradite Klaus Barbie from Bolivia, based on they basically just said, hey, there's no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity and the Nuremberg Charter, so yeah, we're gonna get him. They did. It was around that time that the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, and so we had to say something. We got a guy named Alan Ryan, was our U.S. government Nazi hunter in 1983. He made a 600-page report, August 16th, 1983, on the activities of a certain Klaus Barbie, alias Klaus Altman, alias Becker, alias Merton, etc., and on his relationship with American intelligence. And it was basically just kind of half-assed, apology. And yeah, we were involved with this guy. We didn't know all he was up to. And this is the only time. Wasn't that bad?
That was all over the place. That statement.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, they use the same thing with von Braun and all of them. I mean, we're going to get into von Braun and just kind of what I think he could have easily stood trial at Nuremberg and been convicted.
Absolutely.
But it was just kind of this apology, and the media picked up on it and just ignored it after that. They went with the official story. Yeah, this was bad. They said our bad, but he wasn't involved in anything that bad. Or at least they didn't. No, they couldn't deny that. They couldn't have known he was involved in some of these things.
Yeah.
And he was the only one. Well, that wasn't true. I'm going to get into that a little more in a minute here.
Well, we know that's about the time of Operation Mockingbird, too. So the OSS or the CIA controlled the level of news that was coming in and out of stuff, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Which they still do, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, yeah, this, in effect, almost was a laundering. I like to look at it as a laundering operation here. It kind of laundered this whole idea of us bringing over these scientists, and because
that's a good way to put it. That's a good turn of phrase. Like, instead of laundering money, we laundered people.
yeah. It was after it had already happened, but it sets precedent. I mean, it's precedent,
Yeah. I mean, there's no telling And how many people have done it all the way up to the 2000s that we don't even know about yet?
So yeah, legally, this guy was. We didn't honor our extradition agreements with France. We helped him escape directly. A war criminal go free, and it took decades for him to finally come to justice. So yeah, I wanted to start with him because I'm not even sure if he's the worst, but
Yeah.
he was pretty bad, and that's something we know happened.
Yeah.
Without a
And
doubt.
by the time he comes to justice, he's 74 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he's basically outlived his usefulness by whatever countries wanted to use this guy. And I think that's probably the most atrocious and disgusting of the whole story, is you wait till somebody's old and senile and it's like, yeah, you've outlived your necessity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he died
Now
of
we'll throw you
cancer. France had abolished the death penalty, so they couldn't give him capital punishment. But yeah, he basically was given a life sentence after he had already, gone to South
Lived his
America
life,
and
man.
schmoozed, helped the government there. And
So what was his primary give? What was his value as an asset?
okay, I was going to get into that.
Okay, sorry.
Well, what they claimed was the reason they did it was he knew too much about things that would be embarrassing to us. Well, I don't buy that. What do you do with somebody who knows too much? Let's just be honest.
You take them out.
Usually just take them out.
You don't give them a vacation to South America. You might tell them that and throw them out of the plane on the way. But no,
exactly.
Yeah, I don't buy that. And I'm not even 100% sure what it was, but they definitely used him. It just shows you that they wanted guys who were involved in the Nazi intelligence work, which tells me they wanted to learn from them.
Well, he was primarily used for the Cold War. The fact is that he had all sorts of data on the Soviets and their particular activities, and so his massive usefulness was, I guess, was that.
Yeah,
was his understanding of communism.
It all came down to they either had or claimed to have knowledge. Oftentimes they didn't really. Oftentimes they were horrible. We'll get into that with the Gellin Organization. They didn't know that much. They fed crap a lot of times to the. But yeah,
all of these. Yeah.
So yeah. Klaus Barbie was just one of the first acknowledgments we got from our government, other than the paperclip scientists, that we were involved intelligence-wise with some really, really shady characters. And he wasn't the only one, so I'll go into that now. There was a guy named Otto Skorzeny who was captured in the late 50s and mysteriously escaped, and also got in one of the rat lines, and he made it to Spain eventually, because Spain was still under the Francoist regime, which kind of semi-allied with the Nazis. Anyway, he was contracted by the CIA using the Gellin Org to help train Egyptian security forces, and he in turn hired a bunch of other ex-Nazis to come help him. Skorzeny was this big hulking guy. Hitler loved him. He helped snatch Mussolini out of Italy when that government was about to fall. Like a lot of them, he had a big dueling scar going down his face from his younger days. And he was an unrepentant Nazi. He never never changed his mind about what he did. And we used him to help Nasser in Egypt, basically. Abdel Nasser. So yeah, there was another guy, Otto von Bolschwing. He basically went and found the CIC and offered his services, and eventually worked for some of the same people.
Well, let me ask you a question. Was the MI6 or whatever they were called back then, were they involved in some of this stuff and they just kept it hidden using Nazi? Did they import Nazis into Britain?
Yeah, I didn't get into Britain much on this. I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
But they knew good and well when Ryan said that in the early 80s. He had to have known this. If he did a 600-page report on it, he had to have come across other names. And so yeah, and the Gellin Organization. Let's get in that. Otto Gellin.
Yeah.
He was just a Wehrmacht intelligence officer, and was towards the end of the war fell out of favor with Hitler. So he had a bunch of microfilms and stuff put into a steel drum and hid somewhere. And he was ready probably before the war was over to go ahead and see what he could get out of this. Another opportunist. And we talked about that a little bit in the last episode, that you saw that a lot with the scientists. Well, they weren't ideological Nazis; they were more opportunists. And well, is that any better?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not.
You can respect idealists a little bit. I'm not saying I respect the Nazis, but you can kind of understand them a little bit better. They're idealists. They're sticking to their ideals. Well, what about someone who's just like, what can I get out of this?
They have skin in the game. An
Mm-hmm.
idealist does. You understand what I'm saying? They have skin in the game. The opportunists don't. And yeah.
But anyway, Gellin basically offered his services initially to the CIC, the Army Intelligence. And so, he basically built a intelligence organization. He worked with a lot of emigres, like Germans and others, some of the so-called freedom fighters that the Nazis employed on the Eastern Front. And just built this intelligence network in Europe. He was involved in contracting Skorzeny for the job in Egypt. And he without a doubt had SS officers working for this to escape justice, working in this organization. One in particular was a guy named Franz Six. Franz Six was the leader of one of the notorious Einsatzgruppen. These were the mobile killing squads on the Eastern Front. So the Babi Yar massacre, that big ravine where they just mowed down Russian Jews. He wasn't involved with that. I don't know if he was involved with that specifically, but that's the kind of thing the Einsatzgruppen did.
Yeah.
They went in often in concert with local Nazi sympathizers and just slaughtered. So Franz Six, an Einsatzgruppen leader, was working for the Gellin Organization. And there were others. So the Gellin Org just shows that these were guys who weren't technically brought over here to live. They were, I'm sure, made very comfortable, paid well, and working once OSS became the CIA, working for the CIA. And basically just feeding them crap. Oh yeah, East Germany's gonna invade us any moment here, kind of thing. Again, war crimes, people who should have stood trial and been executed. Certainly Franz Six escaped justice and were used by us in the fight against the Soviets, the intelligence espionage fight against the Soviets.
You know what I'm sensing and what I'm feeling about this, about even our discussion and our dive into this is what we're trying to get out there to everybody is everybody's heard of Operation Paperclip, and we assume it's mostly just scientists that they brought over here. Okay, well maybe they brought some psychologists and they got involved in some mind control, MKUltra, but we need to, like you're doing, we need to really dive deeper and see that they had some really awful, unrepentant men. There's this myth that it's just sheer propaganda that America is innocent and is the freedom and justice of the world. And I'm not besmirching our country in this sense, but people need to know that this wasn't just a science thing. I mean, we pulled in, like you're saying, we pulled in people for intelligence stuff, which and other things you'll get into in this, and that's huge. I think people need to see that.
Well, and what are we, kind of the city on the hill internationally?
Well,
I mean, we're the model we're supposed to be.
Supposed to be.
The idea is, well, they're worse. The Soviets, the Soviets were worse than us, but we're supposed to be so much better. You can look at so much of our history and say that, and the Atlantic slave trade. It wasn't that there wasn't slavery going on in history. I mean, that was the norm. It's just based on our ideals that we were supposedly founded on. We should have been better.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to the things we're talking about with Operation Paperclip. We should have been better. You can always point to somebody that was worse. We should have been better.
Yeah.
So the Gellin Org, Otto Gellin. Later, he was basically just hired by West Germany, just folded into their sort of version of the CIA. And these are the more extreme cases. Let's just look at even just, all right, von Braun. We talked about him a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. He's been really whitewashed in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, if you just look at the international law, legal implications here, which maybe there's a question. I don't know what y'all think about international law. I'm not sure that we should be bound to it the same way we're bound to our laws, but we need to honor our agreements. And we were a part of the the International Tribunal at Nuremberg. Let's just look at, war crime. The three things, the following acts, any of them are crimes coming. This is from the Nuremberg Charter here. Within the jurisdiction of the tribunal for which there shall be individual responsibility. So, crimes against peace, namely planning, preparation, initiation, waging of wars of aggression. I'm not so sure von Braun was involved in that, so I'll just skip to the next one. War crimes, namely violation of the laws or customs of war. Such violations shall include, but not be limited to, murder, ill treatment, or deportation to slave labor, or for any other purpose of civilian population of or in occupied territory, murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war or persons on the seas, killing of hostages, plunder of public or private property, wanton destruction of cities, think V2 rockets,
yeah,
towns or villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity. So, yeah, I would say wanton destruction of cities there for the war crimes, the V2 rockets. Von Braun, I mean, he knew those rockets were going to be fired. They never knew exactly where those things were going to land. So, yeah, I would say he was indirectly involved in that. Deportation to slave labor. We know that Nordhausen employed the Mittelwerk, we talked about, employed slave labor. And he admitted that he went there and saw the conditions and were horrified by them. He would sometimes push for harder work, which he knew had to mean slave laborers were going to die. Now, he claims when he toured the facilities, he never witnessed anyone being beat or killed. I don't believe that. It happened all the time, and they weren't going to stop it because Wernher von Braun came by. Okay, so, and the third one, crimes against humanity, namely murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population before or during the war, or persecutions on political, racial, or religious grounds, and execution of or in connection with any crime within the jurisdiction of the tribunal, whether or not in violation of domestic law of the country were perpetrated. Leaders, this is the paragraph after the leaders, organizers, instigators, and accomplices participating in the formulation or execution of a common plan or conspiracy to commit any of the foregoing crimes are responsible for all acts performed by any persons in execution of such a plan. So, yeah, he was, I think, knowing that his rockets were being built with slave labor, to me, makes him an accomplice.
Yes.
He aided and abetted. So, yeah, Arthur Rudolph, who was involved in the same stuff, was also brought on and worked in it was in the 80s. It was well after Wernher von Braun died in the late 77 from cancer, I think. So Arthur Rudolph, who was involved in a lot of the same things, basically knew that, new information had come out and he was going to be implicated in it. So he just agreed to basically give up his American citizenship and go back to Germany so he didn't have to face any trials. Well, von Braun escaped through death. Surely von Braun would have come under the same microscope eventually. So yeah, von Braun definitely legally should have faced the same justice. And here's the other thing. They did such a good job. That's the other frustrating thing. I mean, they did such a good job. They got Goering, they got Himmler, they got so many top guys, and they did face justice for this. That, just creates more of a glaring contrast when you look at what didn't happen with people like von Braun, Rudolph, and others. So yeah, as far as the legal question, von Braun should have faced justice for this, without a doubt.
It's just huge moral compromise for national security's sake. And that's what they still use that. I mean, they just used that a few years ago with a certain illness and national security. And that's I would think that's what probably Hitler did in Germany, that and the getting out of the depression or whatever. But yeah, national security. We did that with Bush Jr. after 9/11. We gave up so many freedoms and and fear is a huge motivator, and that's how you make people afraid. Yeah.
Well, and here's another. I think we talked a little bit about this. Ambrose. We talked about him.
Yeah. Boy, he was a maverick.
He was, basically Lieutenant Colonel Tarr basically moved him around to keep him from getting justice for a long time, and then brought in.
Yeah.
Yeah, got a Dow Chemical guy who was coming and touring the facilities, seeing what they could learn from that. Met with him and Von Klink, who worked with him, and talked about, after all this is over, we would love to start a relationship with you to see how you can help Dow Chemical. So yeah, you got corporate interests involved there. People wanting to make money off of a guy who basically Ambrose you remember this from the Jacobson book. He basically took this facility that was being used for chemical warfare and made it look like a soap factory.
Yeah.
To try to trick everybody. You had a Lieutenant Colonel Cotard basically trying to keep him away from the people trying to find him, meeting with some chemical guy from Dow Chemical. So yeah, you see the place where business overlapped here.
Well, this is probably the beginning of the military-industrial complex that we talk about, that Eisenhower talked about later. I think it was Eisenhower, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep. Well, and okay, so
he knew all too well. Yeah.
One of the chemicals the Nazis used to just flat out kill people, Tauben and sarin, were later used in experiments at Edgewood Arsenal. So here we go. The MKUltra connection on soldiers. Now they use smaller amounts, very much smaller amounts, because it didn't take much. And it basically incapacitated them. And they weren't fully informed about what was happening, obviously. So they couldn't give informed consent.
Well, they probably thought it was just tear gas. That's when my dad went through the military. There's I don't know, BT, did you do this too, where you had to go into a chamber with gas, and you had to survive as long as you could, and then you had to put your mask on and all that kind of stuff? They probably just snuck it in with that.
Yeah. So but the Tauben opened up a bigger discussion about how can we incapacitate or influence, what chemicals can we use to break down people's resistance and get information that we need from them.
And where LSD came from?
Yeah, well, yeah, that started the discussion about, which led to going to Switzerland and discovering LSD, and led into the whole MKUltra thing here. So yeah. And because Tauben was too deadly to just be using to get people to talk or to interrogate. So they wanted something that was a little more, I guess, subtle and would make people easier to talk to. So in that case, it's less people being used and more just Nazi-type methods being used. We use the same chemical that they were using to kill people to just see how can we incapacitate people. I thought that was important, that Tauben and sarin were used to inflict harm.
Well, all those chemicals, like biological and chemical warfare, were they forbidden in the international law? It's really interesting. You can't use a shotgun in war. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
And Japanese did, but
eventually, I think under it wasn't till don't ever say he didn't do anything good. Nixon finally put an end to chemical warfare. I forget exactly. Let me see.
Or at least what we know about chemical warfare.
Yeah. I doubt it.
Yeah, MKUltra.
No, chemical warfare was used in one of the reasons for going to Iraq.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That was one of we classified that when we didn't find nukes, what we really wanted to find. Well, we know he used chemical warfare, and honestly, I don't know that chemical warfare is any worse than just blowing people up.
Yeah.
So there's a question of that, because but
blowing people up is a little more. A little less suffering, a little less.
Yeah.
It depends on the nature.
Suffering.
No, well, there's always stuff like people burn up. Even if you say that this isn't anti-personnel, this isn't an incendiary, it's still, there's going to be some people who just burn alive when you drop bombs and are killed in more slow and indirect. The statement on chemical and biological defense policies and programs, a speech delivered. So 1969. Nixon announced the end of offensive biological weapons and chemical weapons.
And it would still be several more decades before napalm was illegalized.
Yeah.
Boy, that stuff. So yeah, it is now. It wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of this comes down to this, what we talked about, this end justifies the means.
Yeah.
We decided.
Elites have a whole mindset about that. I can't remember. I saw it in some movie. It was predictive programming where they basically they talked about that, and Sandy and I were watching it. I'm like, see, that's exactly how they think. They think they're doing good, but
Yeah.
the ends
Yeah.
justify the means. I mean, it's like Dallas Willard said. There's not anybody out there who just says, I think I'll do evil just for evil's sake.
Yeah.
Serial killers, in their weird, morbid kind of way, have the thoughts that they're doing good, which is
Yeah.
bizarre, but it's still true.
Well, and here's the other thing, more people with more sinister motives will often use something people can really get on board with. We've talked about this with Amy before with the pedo stuff, like,
Yeah.
and the human trafficking, that people
Yes.
will use that, I mean, to perpetuate more human trafficking because
Yeah.
they know people will get on board with that. We talked about that with some of the questions about what was the name of that movie again? I've already forgotten it. About human trafficking with the shady
Something,
connections.
yeah, with
Yeah.
Jim Caviezel.
Yeah,
Rick,
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
can't remember the name of it either.
I can't remember it. But anyway, I think anti-communism can really, I mean, that was something people really got on board with. You got your McCarthy's. Now, he's a tough person to talk about because a lot of times people will say, McCarthy did nothing wrong. I think he did.
Yeah.
I think the fact that he knew there were communists in our country infiltrating, that's what it comes down to. He was right about that. Well,
levels of government.
yeah, but what did he do about it? He destroyed people's lives a lot of times because they went to a meeting when they were younger. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had some bad ideas when I was younger that I'm glad people don't hold me to now.
Well, the thing is, it's like, you want to believe in the good intentions of those in power.
Yeah.
But it's like, I mean, honestly, the truth isn't so simple. Something like Operation Paperclip, that was a murky program. It brought Nazi scientists and war criminals into the United States. It shows how far a government is willing to go to secure its own agenda. And that's part of the problem, is that the U.S. intelligence was more valuable than morality.
Yeah.
And so the U.S. turns a blind eye to the darkness and the evils of the Nazi past,
Yeah.
and they choose pragmatism instead of justice. Right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
we're living in an environment where the government has sworn to fight tyranny, but they're using the very monsters it sought to defeat. And it's all in name of the greater threat, communism. And so in the Cold War, that line between the enemy and the ally becomes blurred. And so we're living in a gray area where people like, you were mentioning Klaus Barbie at the beginning of the show, where they found a second chance to continue their manipulations. I mean, we're talking about a guy who was responsible 14,000 deaths of Jews in concentration camps, several dozen children from a orphanage was sent to Auschwitz, and they just say that the ends justify the means, but honestly, those means are too dark to ever really justify the actions committed afterwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you have to become what you're fighting, then there's no use in fighting what you're becoming.
No, because what happens is you generate a creature that is more enemy than you were, and you end up with this one-upsmanship that will continue until everything is defeated and obliterated.
Well, and there just seems to be this idea that all bets are off when you're talking about international stuff. We don't have to ever live up to our ideals. And I know war and international relationships, like I said, are different.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure what I think about some notion of international law that a country is bound to. But if our ideals don't apply in war on an international level in defense, then are we really going to apply them locally, nationally, state and local level?
No.
So I think that's an important question. Where's the line where you've crossed over from just genuinely caring about defending your nation into just becoming the very, like Brandon said, becoming the very thing you're fighting against?
Yeah.
So that's the main thing I got moral implications wise out of this is just, and again, anti-communism. In our day, we need to be careful about anti-wokeism.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone who comes to you waving the anti-woke banner is not your friend, and we need to make sure we're not hitching our wagon to people who are worse than the woke crowd in the name of wokeism. At the end of the day, is just communism. It's a form of Marxism
with Nazism thrown into it. That's what.
You're right. Identity-based socialism. That's what that was National Socialism.
I mean, fascism and Nazism aren't mutually exclusive. It just so happened that not the Nazis were fascist. You can be a communist and still be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, well, yeah, in the early days of the Nazis, you had guys in the SA, the brown shirts, that they purged because they felt like the revolution hadn't gone far enough as far as equalizing. I mean, they were closer to the Marxists. A lot of times they called them beefsteak Nazis because they wore that brown shirt, brown on the outside, red on the inside, kind of like a rare steak. But at the end of the day, there wasn't a huge difference in the Nazis. They just kind of swapped class for race, so to speak. Like the struggle wasn't against class; the struggle was for your race against the others, and it was the same thing.
It's still statism too.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why people worry about Trump, is because they see him as being very statist.
Yeah.
And I'm probably gonna get crap for saying this, but in a lot of ways, it can be perceived that, and that we don't need to hitch our wagon to patriotism, but it's actually a veiled form of statism.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and totalitarianism, by its very nature, has an individual or a party ultimately in control of your economy. So, by its very nature, that's socialism. Whether they call themselves socialist, and let's not forget the Nazis, National Socialists. They weren't playing with that word.
Even in our context now in America, you have to realize that neither side is really non-socialist.
Yeah,
we have no pure capitalists. The corporate interests,
differing degrees.
Yeah. Corporate interests still rule the day. It's just different corporations.
Yeah,
it's just what it is. And the real question is what are we willing to sacrifice to win?
Yeah.
The reality is we entered into this whole realm of battle against an enemy that wasn't really an enemy at the time, other than they wanted to do their thing. And it's just like, well, the Nazis, Germany's just taking over the Europe, and it's like, now here comes the Soviets, they're taking over everybody else. It's like the manufacture of an enemy is a pretty common thing. But we can't forget the fact that a lot of the same experimentations that were going on in Nazi Germany were going on in the United States. The eugenics research began in the late 1800s and didn't really come to a stop until California illegalized it in 1979. And it even continues to this day with selective sterilization or
and
selective abortion. Let me specifically answer one thing. If your child has any kind of genetic malformation, your doctor will say, hey, this kid's going to be born with Down syndrome. Would you like to terminate? If that is not selective sterilization or selective abortion, I can't tell you what isn't. And that's eugenics. And that was something that we were doing in the United States, and the Nazis were experts at.
Well, and there's no escaping the fact the Nuremberg Charter had to be careful about this because of the Americans too, because the language of enslavement and our history with that. But not only that, but just the Jim Crow laws that were still in effect around that time.
Tuskegee, anybody? I mean,
Tuskegee, you got black men being essentially lied to and given syphilis there.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, if that's not eugenics, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yep. Yeah, this always leads just to a great discussion. I couldn't agree more. America, at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade being an American citizen. We've got it better.
Be honest.
Yes.
But that gives us more responsibility. We should be better. We should act better. Even the excuse, well, they're worse, shouldn't work.
Well, the excuse is always to make something a humanoid being non-human. You take away their personhood.
Yeah.
Therefore, you don't have to treat them like people.
Yeah. Yep. And they called the Jews like rats and cockroaches, and any kind of.
There was a big development specifically about that with the falsified. Well, there's a book it was produced called I think it was called the Elders of Zion.
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
That's it. Yep. And I mean, it was just a manufactured fiction.
Henry Ford at one time put copies of that in every new Model T I've heard. I don't know how true that was, but
you start taking into not just Operation Paperclip, but the Nazi war machine. You start finding individuals who not merely participated by financing, but participated by ideology, and it becomes a scary.
So a lot of American Germans. Yep.
Yeah.
I still stand by what I've said a million times, and I will continue to say it. And I don't know where I heard it, but the Nazis didn't lose World War II. Germany did.
Yeah.
Right.
The Nazis just relocated, and we all know where they went.
Yeah.
Besides South America, and
yeah.
This is the introduction to that whole. I mean, I think we're still reaping the fruits of that whole social engineering type stuff. Is what we're seeing, and that came from the Nazi influence. You cannot convince me otherwise.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's inescapable.
Well, thanks, Lindsay, so much for your insights, bro. It was a good discussion, man. I really enjoyed hearing these insights.
Well, I won't say I enjoyed studying it, but it's never a fun subject to read about. But it's good for us to expose this so that people can see. Again, this bleeds into so much of what we talk about on the show.
Well, it goes back to Laurel Canyon, goes back to social engineering, goes back to the intelligence agencies, and we can maybe explore this another time. But I still think that stuff that in that Air Force base where Nancy was and where Jared Leto lives, I think that was used in some shape, form, or fashion for some Operation Paperclip stuff.
Yeah,
it seems to me that there was some Nazis in that. I read somewhere that there was some Nazis that were actually in that base for a season.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thanks, Lindsay, for that deep dive into that.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.